Good evening, everyone, and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update. Tonight, the 4th of January 2013. I'd like to start tonight's update by just expressing our concern for the people of Tasmania who have just gone through their hottest day on record in parts of the state, and we've seen some devastating bushfires and fires going through towns and cities and destroying a lot of homes. And hopefully, with any luck, we do wish that no one has died in that situation, but it is a terrible tragedy at the moment that's unfolding there. A lot of people's lives have been torn upside down in the space of one day due to extreme heat. So on behalf of the Oz Cyclone Chasers team, we do hope that everyone stays safe out there, and there's going to be a lot more fire risk to come for Southern Australia, so we do hope that everyone takes and pays attention to total fire bans that will be issued and enforced across Southern Australia over the next few days. It's a potentially very dangerous situation there over the next few days with heat wave conditions caused by a bit of a blocking high, streaming in some very hot northerly or northeasterly winds through the continent. Anyway, on to tonight's update, and tonight's update will focus on, we're not even going to talk about Frida tonight. Frida's gone. It'll become extratropical over the next day if it hasn't already, and it's just a non-issue at the moment when we're talking tropical cyclones. We will, however, announce the winner of our tropical cyclone Frida online Facebook poll, and that will be announced in tomorrow night's update. We'll issue a very short update tomorrow night unless any of the two lows we're watching decide to ramp themselves up. Alright, so the two areas we're going to watch tonight are going to be the Timor Sea and the East Timor region, possibly going west towards Indonesia, and then the second area we're going to look at is the Northern Coral Sea. Latest water vapour imagery from Australia shows the monsoon trough is creating a hell of a lot of thunderstorm activity anywhere sort of the north of Darwin and to the west of that, creating a hell of a lot of convection. So it's becoming very active up there. It's not exactly very strong, so we're not seeing a huge burst of westerly winds, but it is certainly there. It's making its presence felt. Unfortunately, as far as Australia is concerned, it's still a few hundred kilometres too far to the north to really affect our weather. So we're still in a pre-build-up monsoonal moisture streaming in from the north, but in terms of Australia actually in being under the influence of a monsoon, not yet, sorry. At the moment, we're still in a pre-build-up phase, so we've still got, pre-monsoonal phase, and we've still got thunderstorms developing over the Kimberley, the Territory, bit of storm activity here over the peninsula, but overall, still in a waiting phase, holding phase, watching to see how this monsoon affects the Australian mainland over the next couple of weeks. The BoM are all over the developing situation, and on Wednesday they issued their outlook for the next couple of weeks. And they're basically saying the monsoon trough is really starting to ramp itself up, becoming organised. The MJO is on its way, expected to enhance and increase rainfalls, and cyclone probabilities, I should say. And the but there is that Northern Australia may see an increase of wet weather, but there is still some uncertainty as to whether the trough will actually move south over Australia or remain to the north with this pulse of the MJO. Now, the latest sort of climatic monthly look at the forecast through the CFS and the European model do suggest that the monsoon will make it to Australia, but it will be delayed by another few days. So at this stage, we're probably looking at the monsoon finally approaching Australia or getting over the Australian continent in not next week, but the week after. So that's what the latest climatic stuff from both the CFS and the Euro model are suggesting to us. The GFS model does push the monsoon trough southwards next week. However, the GFS model seems to be very aggressive on a lot of things that don't seem like they're going to happen. So, and we'll talk a bit more about that very shortly. So at this stage, I would say maybe late next week or the week after, and I'd be favouring the week after for the actual monsoon over the continent. Okay, so where's this low we're all watching? And we're going to start by talking about the northwest, and then we're going to talk about the northern Coral Sea towards the end. The low that we're all watching is starting to develop here around East Timor, And what it's expected to do from here is it's expected to slowly develop over the next few days. Eventually, all the guidance is suggesting this is likely to become a tropical cyclone at some point next week. The million-dollar question is exactly where it goes. And I guess the thing we've got to note is that the weaker this thing remains over the next few days, the more chance it's got of pushing a little bit further to the west. Now, if you notice what's just happened, the GFS model is a little bit more bullish with this. This is right now where the low is, but have a look what's coming right at it there. It's got a bit of a northwest surge that's about to hit it over the next 12 to 18 hours, and once it hits it, we start to get a bit of spin happening in this low and a lot of convergence happening. See how these arrows converge? And so what we're going to see is a huge increase in rainfall associated with the low. An initial jut to the east, which is quite normal when it's got a big northwest surge coming at it, and then followed by a starting to drift back towards the west. Now, if we look at why it might start to drift back towards the west, and you can see here it's starting to develop gales. See, this is the thing that we've got an issue with the GFS is it's just making this so rapid, this intensification so rapidly over the next 24 to 36 hours, which makes it look, or makes it seem very unrealistic, the fact that it could be by Sunday afternoon at least a category 1/2 tropical cyclone. It just seems very unrealistic, especially when, if we zoom right in, it's so close to East Timor, and East Timor isn't exactly a flat country. So, it's going to be influenced by terrain and topography, and the model, I think, is really underestimating that and overestimating this system's potential in the short term. So a little bit more realistic view of what should happen comes from the European model. So it too is looking at a very weak circulation developing here. It too is having a look at this 15 to 20 knot monsoon coming through, but it really doesn't form it anywhere near as fast. It really doesn't form it anywhere near as fast as the other model that we just had a look at. It sort of sits right over Timor and eventually pushes slowly to the west. But you see here, it's just a gradual build-up in intensity of the system, and you can see it's a lot more what you would expect to happen, being so close to a landmass and not really copping a massive monsoon surge. But it is, even this model is starting to develop it. This is by Sunday now. You can see here it's over Timor. It's still over the island. The fact that it's over the island is going to make it develop a lot slower than it probably should. If it managed to get itself right over the water, open water, you're probably going to see some more rapid development. But you can see here the system now pushing towards the west, or west-southwest, and it's now only just by around about Tuesday, it's only just getting off into some open water, into an area where it might further develop. And if we have a look at where the system should travel based on the steering flow, we have a look at the 300 hectopascals, which is a little high, but it gives you an idea that its initial movement, if it developed, and this is why we're so umming and ahhing about this, is because if it develops really strong, these winds will eventually have a bit of an influence on it. So if the GFS forecast comes off, the system is probably going to push a lot further south than it is to the west. And so if the GFS is unrealistically deepening it so rapidly, that's going to skew its eventual trajectory. And so this is a little bit more likely. This scenario here shown by the European model is a little bit more likely where the system pushes, or actually a lot more likely if the system develops slowly, to push more west-southwest, a long way west-southwest in fact, before it starts to drift towards the south. But by that stage, if it drifts far enough to the west, and you can see it's only a very slow drift rather than a big movement. It sort of just sits there almost. And if we can go far enough towards the west and before it drifts south, then it's going to avoid the coast altogether. And so that's a key factor, is its movement over the next 2 days becomes a key factor on whether this thing will eventually hit land or whether it will continue to push out towards the west or southwest. So just to give you a quick example of what I'm talking about, if we look at the no-gaps model, it forms a pretty well similar area. It keeps it off the actual Timor landmass, and so because of that, it gives it a chance of further developing. And by the 10th of January, it has it as a Category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone off the Kimberley coast and heading southwards. So that's as far as the model goes with it. But that's an example of one model. Let's compare that with the CMC. Now the CMC model has it developing a lot closer to Darwin as a tropical low, and then pushes out to the west-southwest through the whole period. And so the CMC model has this as a Category 3 tropical cyclone by the 10th of January, well off, and I mean well off the Pilbara coastline, and continuing to push even further away. So that's the CMC's model take. The UK Met has this system developing near Timor, little bit of a southward drift to it before pushing it west, and then southwest, and then more south-southwest, and by the 10th has it as a Category 2 system, well off the Pilbara coast, but a little bit further to the east than the CMC did. And at the moment, it looks like at that stage, the system's continuing to drift in a south-southwesterly direction from there. This is the very aggressive GFS model. The GFS model has it forming a fair bit further to the east than the other models, basically almost due north of the Tiwi Islands, and then has it pushing to the south, then to the west, not really developing it too significantly past a Category 1, maybe low Category 2 type system, and we saw that in the initial projection, but it does have it hitting the Kimberley coastline north of about, or north of Derby, as a Category 1 type tropical cyclone. So you can see there just the variability in the track forecast from the two different models. From the number of different global computer models. Okay, so why are the global computer models struggling in terms of whether it's going to hit land or whether it's going to keep pushing west? Well, basically, there's a bit of byplay happening here between this big, strong upper level high and this fairly strong upper level trough in the Southeast Indian Ocean. And then the models are struggling with the monsoon and how much of an effect it's going to have in the lower and mid levels of the atmosphere, especially at the start of this system's life cycle. Now, we can see here overall that the ensemble wants to push it to the west-southwest, but really what we want to factor in is what's going to happen to these upper systems over the next few days, because they're the things that are going to govern whether this eventually hits the coast or goes west. So at this stage, we've got a big upper level high. Now, with an upper level high right there, it's going to push anything and everything that has any sort of intensity to it and height to it out to the west-southwest. No doubt in the world, if there is a high that big there, that's the way the system goes. Now, the issue there, the doubt comes, is the fact that is this high going to be as strong as the European is predicting? And some of the models suggest no. And then the second issue is this high going to be in that position? And some of the models also say no there. They have the system a little bit further to the east, and therefore, if the system goes a little bit further to the east, that steering level flow isn't as strong and isn't going to be as westerly. It's going to be more southwesterly. And so if we fast forward then to the next day, Tuesday, the Euro ensemble really wants to push this high even back to the west. Does have it weakening slightly, but pushes it even further to the west, which means that the upper level trough doesn't get a chance to get its little hands on this tropical cyclone and try to drift it back to the south, back towards the coast. And once again, there's a lot of variability in this forecast, because if that high doesn't drift to the west, and as I said, some models don't drift it to the west, they keep it over the top of either eastern or central Australia, and if that happens, the cyclone will in fact recurve. But if what we see here happens as we see it, this system will continue drifting in a west-southwesterly direction, maybe even a westerly direction as it heads early next week. A lot of variability in the forecast. We're not going to go past Tuesday, and we're not going to talk about potential strike zones because there's too much variability in the forecasting at the moment. But suffice to say, we do expect a low. We do expect that low to drift towards the southwest or west-southwest, and we do expect it to form into a cyclone next week. Where it can go, too early to tell. All right, that's enough on this one. Well, let's talk about the Coral Sea. Okay, so in the Coral Sea, around about next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is when we're looking at something possibly forming here. And we're just talking about a weak low at this stage, but the circulation you can see here forms somewhere along a bit of a trough line. And we've got a bit of an eddy rather than a circulation on the Monday, and then by Tuesday, this is the GFS model. By Tuesday, it forms a little bit of a circulation. Doesn't really do much with it and maintains it reasonably weak. You can see there it's almost trophy in nature. It's just very elongated, but it does start to get a little bit of 25 to 30 knot winds on both its north and south side. So it may have some potential of further developing, and if we see it sort of just drifting aimlessly, no real direction to it, and if we have a look at the conditions at the time, the humidity levels in the atmosphere are pretty good. The instability levels in the atmosphere look like they're pretty good. And if we look also at wind shear, which is a big killer of Coral Sea systems, the Coral Sea wind shear levels are excellent. Anywhere sort of north of Cairns is survivable, but anywhere north of Cooktown, there is almost zero wind shear. So look, if something forms at the surface, there's certainly some potential there for it to intensify further. As far as a coastal impact further towards the south in the populated coastline like Cairns or Townsville or anything like that, at this stage most modelling is showing a lot of wind shear maintaining in this area, and so if the system decides to track a little bit further to the south, it's very unlikely to intensify much, because being in such a wind shear environment, it just will not be able to develop the tall, strong thunderstorms it needs. Just to show you that we do have very good model support and agreement for that, this is the European at the same time next Wednesday night as the GFS that I just showed you, and you can see the Euro also forming the weak low right where my cursor is. See that northwest wind into it, southeast wind into it, and a convergence area, a circulation area. And if we keep tracking that system through to the end of the forecast period, it doesn't really form much more than it has. It just sort of loiters and doesn't do too much at all. But it's certainly there. We're not seeing things. There is certainly a circulation there. It's very weak, and the European is suggesting that there's going to be a fair bit of dry air just to its south and possibly encroaching in on the circulation, and that's keeping it. And you can see this is the moisture levels in the atmosphere. Blue is good, purple is bad for cyclones, and there's a lot of purple very close to the circulation center. So if I take you back to the winds again, this is the circulation center. Take you back to humidity again, you can see the purple just getting into or very close to that circulation center. If we look at wind shear by the Euro late next week, and we see actually quite very good shear conditions over the northern Coral Sea, and in fact even in the Cairns Townsville area they weaken the wind shear out a bit. So look, if the system can get itself together and can get itself going, there's certainly nothing there that's going to really hold it back, except for maybe a little bit of dry air later next week. But as I say, if it can get itself going in the surface, there's probably not too much going to hold it back. But as I say, the models are really not keen on this area for further development, even though they do develop a weak surface circulation. So that's the latest we've got on that. I'll just show you a couple of models that might have picked up. So this is the UK Met model. It's picked up the fact that it might develop between the PNG and the Solomons and drift basically towards the south, and not really form too much, but getting down to about 1,002, 1,004 hectopascals here by the 10th of January. So the UK Met has also initialised the system, but a long way further to the east than the other two models. And a key factor in this, once again, is a very, very slow or even a lack of real development in the system. The CMC model, that's also picked up on the circulation, developing here on the 7th of January, pushing down towards the central northern Coral Sea by about the 10th of January, just a slow southeast drift. But once again, same as the other modelling, really not developing this into a significant system at all, just keeping it fairly weak, keeping it pushing towards the south or southeast for the at least for the early term. Very nice sea surface temperatures throughout the northern Coral Sea, so they're never going to be an issue this time of year. And the no gaps model, well, it seems to be quite a bit off compared to the others. It wants to develop it on the or around the Solomons in a couple of days' time, and pushes it west and then south into the central northern Coral Sea as well. But once again, if there's any consistency between them all, they really don't develop this system into anything significant. As I showed you though, there's nothing in the models that suggests that there's any reason for it not to develop if it can form at the surface. So there's certainly the middle and upper level conditions in that region are very, very nice for potential further development, but I think there's a lot of doubt as to how strong the northerly feed into this is and how strong the actual convergence is where the system develops. So I think its issue is more at the surface rather than in its middle and upper levels, but time will tell, and it is an area that we are watching. Alright folks, thanks very much for watching tonight. We'll have another update tomorrow night. As I say, it'll be quite a short one tomorrow night. We'll just announce a winner and just a quick brief look at what these two systems are doing if they don't do anything. If they do start to show real good signs of development, then it'll be a nice long one. Thanks very much for watching tonight, people, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.